I was a DJ on Indie 103.1 from the beginning. And the way I got the gig was because I became friends with Michael Steele, the program director. And it was the first time ever. Like, I wanted to be close to the people at KROQ, but they weren't cool. In fact, they did everything. Like, I would try, hey, and it just like, I wasn't part of the crew. I wasn't part of the gang, you know? Later on with Side One Dummy, when we had bigger bands like Flogging Molly and Go Go Bordel, and like the band, more with Flogging Molly, then they were cool. But Michael Steele, I don't know, man. We went to lunch, we hit it off, and he was programming the station, and he was into ideas. And he asked me, what do you think we need at the station? This is pre-Spotify when these guys went on the air. And at the time, they're playing music that no one had heard on the radio in a long time. They would go from like a Band of Horses track to an X track, from, off of Los Angeles. So they were just running the gamut. And they had Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols doing afternoons. Henry Rollins from Black Flag was on there, which was awesome. Dave Navarro had a show on there. And he was just into putting together ideas on radio that no one had ever heard before or would give a chance to. And he asked me, is there anything you think that we need on the weekly shows? Is there anything? And I'd grown up with a show in the Bay Area in San Jose called Vinyl Rights. It was on every Thursday night. It was hosted by this DJ named Alex Morgan. And for 2 hours, he played all punk rock and told you what shows were going on and that you should go to. And I at this point, I was like, I think that'd be cool to do a show similar to that. So I pitched him on, hey man, it'd be cool if we did a show called Complete Control Radio. And, we play punk rock. And when I say punk rock, it'd be like everything from, say, like, I don't know, obviously a classic track like from The Damned into something new from like a band like out of Los Angeles, like the Briggs or something like that. Like, let's just run the whole gamut. We'll play NoFX, we'll play, Lagwagon, but we'll also play like classic. Like we'll play the Germs and we'll have people on the show and I can have guests on because I know all these people. And I remember at lunch, he's like, that sounds great. Yeah, let's do that. You should definitely do that. Can you start tomorrow? I was like, what? I'd never even been on the air, ever. I always got interviewed, but I never was a person hosting a show. And he, without missing a beat, gave me that opportunity. I remember 2 days later, I showed up, 8 o'clock, and I was on the air every Thursday night, 8 to 10. And that show, it was so insane because for a while, I was on right after Henry Rollins. So Henry would hang out in there, and I remember I'd come in to do my show because the original slot for me was 10 to midnight, and before that it was Henry Rollins, and he would do like 7 to 10 or 8 to 10, and then Joseph from 10 to midnight. That was my original slot, and then they moved me up at a certain point. I remember going in there, and it was so surreal to Henry Rollins just finishes his show. I have to go on after him, and he would sit and hang out. I remember he was like full workout dude. He had like these like tacos. He would be eating a taco, like just chicken in a tortilla, like so not fun, but and we would talk about music, and he's very intense and he's super, super cool. Steve Jones, he would leave me CDs because everyone thought Steve Jones wanted to play like, I'm going to play Blitz, I'm going to play Cockspar. He didn't want to play any of that stuff, but all these, like Captain Oi, this record company would send him all these CDs, and Jonesy found out that, that was the stuff that I was playing on my show. So he would leave just CDs and CDs. And then I would sometimes have to go in there in the afternoon when he was on the air. He'd always come over. I'd always go in there and say hi to him. And he was so cool. What I loved about Steve Jones was he gave 0 Fs. Like, he did not care at all. Like, and not in a I'm a cool guy way, like just zero. It did not care about the way, like anything. Like, I remember he'd wear readers, and I'd just gotten readers. I'd take them on, take them off. He's like, mate, just leave them on. Quit trying to fight it. I remember I came in once with this jacket that I thought was super cool, and he came right over to me and he goes, it's too long. You need to have it this. Like, he knew, he was like, you know what it was? It was like Grandpa Steve Jones, like the older mentor that you want in your life. And he'd talk a lot about music. He'd tell me, he had all these reggae songs, and he was telling me a lot about that stuff and tell great stories and just be super cool. Then there was Dave Navarro. Oh my God, Dave Navarro's this big. He was so he was so cool though. Like I loved Jane's Addiction. All of a sudden I would see him on Saturday nights, you know, because my show got moved to that time, and it was Dave Navarro and all those dudes from all those cool bands. And I remember I used to bring my daughter there, and my daughter would sit in the background, and I remember they were all smoking in the studio, and my daughter's sitting in there, and I'll never forget this, Dave Navarro looks around and sees my daughter sitting there. He goes, whoa, whoa. And he starts talking to his boys like, yo, everyone put your smokes out right now. And I go, oh, dude, and he goes, no way, man. Like he went from like Dave Navarro, like rock star, Dave Navarro, no shirt, just guitar legend, to straight up just dude smoking in front of kids is lame. I apologize for that. Sorry, because my show was after his at one point. And he did this weird thing too once. I remember, like, imagine this table. This is how like flexible the dude was. He would sit on the corner of the table while he was doing the show. Like it was so surreal. I'd walk in there and there's Dave Navarro sitting on this counter doing his show. And that was super cool. But the days at Indie 103.1 it was so reckless because we were competing with KROQ, and KROQ hated Indie 103.1. And to this day, they're like, it didn't even make a difference. It did make a difference because the first time in years people were listening to the radio. You would show up at a restaurant, you'd show up at a bar, every car going through valet was listening to Indie 103.1. Everybody was listening to Indie 103.1. I remember one time on New Year's Eve, because this was so standard, the power station that we had that transmitted all the music, it went out. That was so standard. And for some reason, I always heard it first. And I call Michael Steele, yo, dude, we're off the air. He's like, damn it, how do you know we're off the air and I don't? And I remember we were off the air once for like part of New Year's Eve. And instead of the radio station saying, oh, we're sorry that we're off the air, we're this, that, they went with the angle of like, yeah, it's New Year's Eve, man. No one wants to work, so we just turn it off, like, and it was so brilliant, like, yeah, whatever. And the best part that was going on at that point too about all of us doing radio was it really did feel like bands were getting broken off of that stage. I remember off of that radio station. I remember Band of Horses. Funeral, that song, Michael Steele, he's like, what do you think about this? And then, and Shovel, the music director, like we're going to play it. And they were breaking records off of there that later on KROQ added, and sure, the signal wasn't far and you couldn't hear it, once you got out of LA, but it didn't matter because the music they were playing was so much better and so much refreshing than everything else that everybody was hearing. And it was so awesome to be a part of it. I mean, we were convinced that when we would walk to our cars, we were like, dude, is someone gonna take us out? Because it started to get under the skin of a lot of other, out of the bigger stations. And to this day, they'll always underplay it. But anyone that heard it, anyone that was there knows how cool it was at that time.